an honor and a privilege for me to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity. I think that, as with the introduction, we live at a time where there is so much change and at such a pace that being able to step back and try to understand what that is about is difficult enough in a general sense, but even difficult as you narrow down to any individual subject. And so when I was talking to MR and wanted to concentrate on data, the role of the CDO, what's happening in the enterprise, the implications for big data, I was also cognizant of the fact that doing it first thing in the morning to a group of people as a keynote, I had to choose a level of detail that intrigued enough of you without actually saying what you're going to hear for the rest of the 2 or 3 days. So I had to pick my route with a little bit of care, and I'm hoping that what you see now is something that gets you to understand what that journey was. First, the background, the environment. Okay? We live in a world where everybody's connected, everything's connected. We've stopped worrying about whether there will still be anyone or anything not connected as the prices come down. Those discussions from a decade ago don't matter. We're going, 20 billion, 50 billion. The numbers just keep going as to where it would be. Since I know my cat is connected, it tells me how far this is going. It's been happening for the last 60, 70 years, digital rollout, against a backdrop of human migration in ways that could not have been considered before. And it's actually the coming together of these two that people like John Hagel and John Seeley Brown at the Center for the Edge referred to as the big shift. So what we worry about, why we are doing the things we're doing, is not because there's technology looking for a problem to solve, but that the entire business environment, the social environment, the political environment has changed through these two things of hyperconnectivity at the same time as shifts in public policy. And you have to understand those two in order to be able to see what's going on. Whenever you connect two things, one of the first data requirements that takes place is some level of synchronization, referential integrity. Until the steam engine came along, until locomotives came along, until the train was there, we lived in our own time. All time was local. The idea of synchronization only mattered because we went and did something like connect two places with a railway line. Until two communities met, nobody had to learn to translate. So implicit in the idea of connection is a need to be able to do A, synchronization in order to create a common frame of reference, B, protocols, standards, linguistic support, syntactical support to be able to communicate, because you brought two things together that weren't necessarily connectable. And now we're connecting things at a rate of knots in flat networks. Everything is a node on the network. So when you start thinking about the job of the chief data officer, when you start thinking about why data has become so important, it's not that data was always important and big data was always there and analytics was always there. We live in a different world because we are connecting things we never used to before, at a speed we never used to before, at a scale we never used to before. And that changes everything. A number of people refer to what's been happening with data, as with many other things in life, as we're in the second half of the chessboard. Okay? Exponential growth has got to a point where today represents more than all our yesterdays put together. And that's happening all the time. So it's not just scale has happened and we have to deal with it. It continues to happen. And just think about it. You've heard enough about saying, oh, today we create more than was created in the last 3 years, last 5 years, last 10 years, last 3 years created more than history. But we're really reaching a stage where today creates more than all our yesterdays. And so when you want to build product or service, when you want to look at the issues to do with data, you have to keep in mind that you have to build scale-free things in a way, because what we used to consider scale has no meaning. Okay? the networks that emerged, the Facebooks, the Twitters, even the Skypes of this world, suddenly 200, 300, 500 million, a billion, started becoming table stakes for entry into markets where we used to think 20 million was a big number. It's changed the way you have to think about democracy, okay? Something as simple as the way we want to run our lives from a political or government sense, because these things used to be representative. One of the challenges of not everything or everyone being connected, whether it's in roads, whether it's in access, is that you build representative. You build some proxy, you build some sampling techniques, some way of saying, I can't talk to everyone, I can't hear from everyone. And that's changing, and we're in the very early stages of that. We've changed the way markets speak to each other because customers are not recipients of a broadcast environment. Right? The connected customer is able to participate in markets. The entire concept of the web is about being participatory, two-way, no longer broadcast. Technology now allows us to operate remotely, and the shifting of time and place that we used to talk about now affects parts of our life where we have to consider our ethics, because it's not just a technology. You know, when you start dealing with things remotely, you're able to completely transform your own personal experience, and as human beings, we're having to change in order to understand that. As things become more automated, those ethical issues grow even further. You know, how do you build the algorithms that indicate, you know, when you have a couple of cars as a choice to hit and you have to hit one of them? You know, do you go for the one with the babies, or do you go for one with the seat belts, or do you go, you know, when it becomes safer to hit the car with the seat belt, right? It puts a whole new meaning to why you'd wear a seat belt. But these are things that are emerging as a result of hyperconnectivity, and every one of those things needs data to resolve, right? It's not enough just to have the principles. You need the facts and data. You need to be able to look at what's coming out and to be able to understand it. Security, you know, it's not just cybersecurity. Every form of security, especially as we go through the space and migration, again, underpinning it not with emotion, not with just knee-jerk responses, but with data. Almost anything we need to solve in this world, and I'll come back to that, needs data and needs the tools for data. That's the world we live in today. When you look at business models changes, things like Uber, you have to stop thinking about it as anything else other than an ability to release inventory that would otherwise have gone to waste. But the ability to exchange inventory is completely based on having the right standards, the right protocols, the right connectivity, because these are now data businesses. They exist because you can deliver something in the right time, in the right place, in the right way, with all the feedback loops there, with the reputation systems there. Could not have been done in the past. It's still all about data. Law has to change because all of these things have implications to do with privacy. Whose data is it? How does it work? When can you use it? Many things to do with privacy actually affect the idea of personal harm with public good and being able to trade that. The infrastructure is changing. We now look at ways of distributing databases in ways we couldn't before. But again, what are we going to build? A repeat of stored procedures in databases or macros in spreadsheets? Or are we going to learn something from the past and be able to implement these things in ways that are different? Again, the tools, the knowledge, the ability to look at data differently matters. Right? We really, really need to look at data differently. And there are some choices. When you deal with standards, do you go top-down? Do you say a small group of experts can solve the world? You know, a W3C type approach. Or do you go bottom-up and use folksonomies? And the answer for many of these things is both. What matters is adoption. A standard is a standard when it's adopted. In some markets, top-down is the faster route to adoption, some markets bottom-up. But solutions to that are imperative to solving data. We have to learn how to operate in a connected world, in a hyper-connected world, with feedback loops that connect everything we do as individuals, as groups, and as the world. And learning how to deal with that data requires us to think differently. Data itself means nothing. It has meaning because you have context. Context has become the all-powerful king in the area of data, because you must not just have the metadata associated with the data, the time, the place, the people, the relationships, but you must also have an ability to draw on the experience and skills used to interpret the data once you have the context. I'll skip through why I had people like Richard Feynman, Christopher Alexander, Ludwig Boltzmann, and Anton Zeilinger. I'll just name check the four of them, because if you spend time going through what they've done with their lives, you will understand why I bring them into a data speech. But the point is, everything is about data, right? The Zeilinger quote that I have there, we're no longer talking about things and then being associated with information. Information has become the core thing, okay? Whether you look at DNA, whether you look at the implications of what everything having atomicity actually means, whether you look at the way a credit card is just a set of numbers you put on the phone now, you know, none of these things are as physical as they used to be. The move from the physical to saying that things are represented in information, whether they're in physics, whether they're in biology, whether they're in astronomy, that's the place we're getting towards. Our lives have information as a basis. We need to understand that. And that puts a whole pressure on this thing called trust. And it's that I want to concentrate on as I sort of go into the last part of my talk. Everything we do is about trust. You know, I work for a bank. Banking is about trust. It's not about money. Banking is about relationships and about trust. The word bankruptcy actually comes from a breakdown of trust. The word credit comes from belief. Banks exist in order to make it easy for people to look after their assets, to grow their assets, and to interact, do business with each other. And underpinning that trust is an understanding of data. In enterprises, grew up with data as if it was mother's home cooking. We built fortresses around that data because the data we relied on to make decisions was homegrown. It was mother's home cooking. Very, very high trust levels, because we built the systems, we created the data, we knew the conditions under which that data was created, we knew the conventions by which that data was represented, we knew who was involved, and that meant that we built ourselves a culture of dealing with data with very, very high trust levels. And that mattered, because that's the way we have built everything that we currently think of as enterprise data. High trust levels. Now, data is like street food, okay? Except you're blindfolded and you've got your hands tied behind your back. But we have the trust levels of mother's home cooking. While we have data that comes from the outside, we buy data in as services. We have porous firewalls as we build partnerships and alliances that we need to globalize. We have the mobile phones and smart devices. Our firewall, our home, our little secure place where we knew everything about data, died a long time ago, but we didn't change. The role of the Chief Data Officer, the role of the Chief Data Office, the work that's being done in the enterprise, the opportunities you have to build product and service to help us with that is all based around understanding that the trust level that we used to have is not the trust level that is appropriate for now, but trust is critical. Therefore, we need tools to be able to help us rebuild that trust. Okay? When you go to the average enterprise, that's how their data looks. Okay? They barely know what they have, where it is, how it is. Data source management is not a discipline. Data quality management is not a discipline. Right? If you don't know what data you have, if you don't know where it is, if you don't know what it contains, if you don't know who touches it, if you don't know where it goes, then I would suggest you don't know much about your data. And we've got very excited about big data, but some variant of garbage in, garbage out exists in any context. There is work to be done in order to underpin the data we have if we're going to build the trust levels that are needed to replace the alter, the change that has taken place in moving away from mother's home cooking. We need to go back to naming conventions, and we all are. Enterprises are continuing with that, How do you do with the ontology and taxonomy of data? You need to go through classification processes. Right? This is block and tackle work, heavy lifting work, because every enterprise that's going to be really serious about data needs to be able to do this. And shortcuts can be possible when you have technology allow you to speed up the evolution of your data. Every shortcut is an opportunity for someone in this room to build a set of tools or services to help us do that. But understand the wider context. Curation becomes important. Quality management becomes important because the ability to game, just because something is on PowerPoint or in Excel doesn't make it true. But Mother's Home Cooking says it's true. If you never questioned before, why do you start questioning now? Well, I'll tell you why, because you're eating street food and you're going to die if you don't know what's in it. You're going to get allergies if you don't know what's in it. And we are picking up data allergies every day. Get those tools right. Get those tools clean. Get them reusable. Right? This is one of my favorite courses because curation has to be taken up one greater level. If there's more data today than existed yesterday, right, then there's also a little more crap today than there was yesterday, and we've got to get better at dealing with it. All this requires science because one of the things about data is it gives you the opportunity to start going about building hypotheses, testing them, getting the results, getting the feedback loops, repeating them, testing them, having them done independently. Data science is actually about saying we used to do data processing. We've done data collection for a while. At the scales we're operating, it needs science. So the analytical tools we're talking about, yes, you can use them to deal with rubbish. But let's throw the heavy sort of machines at the things we couldn't solve in the past because they were unstructured, conversational, in-flight data. When we have transactional data and all we are is lazy, let's fix the laziness, and those need tools as well. We need governance. Okay? We need to be able to have governance in a way that we've never had before because it doesn't get solved without it. We need to clean out our stables. Okay? How do we help get, if you think about it as Mother's Home Cooking, you have to think about larders where we've had data which we haven't looked at for a very long time, and we have no knowledge about how it's being, what was its sell-by date, on what basis was it actually archived, how easy is it to retrieve. E-discovery, you'll be surprised at how much enterprises spend on it. Because the data is not just about big data and analytics. It's very, very big data in archival, retrieval, discovery as well. And being able to do that over swathes of time you've never had to do before is a very big deal. Being able to solve our processes, thinking of them differently. Why are the blockchain type things coming through? Because when you start scaling to that level, you can think of blockchain as nothing more than a solution to a scaling problem that has existed for a while for how you can account for digital assets and then finding that many of the things we have are digital assets. Insights. Everyone, every second company, if I walk out there, there's a possibility, I haven't done that yet, as to how many companies will tell me that they provide me customer insights. But are they thinking through the implications of legal, of privacy, of security in doing that? Are they making sure it is their data? When someone talks to me about customer data, there's a clue in the word. Customer. Whose data is it? Why do we call it customer data? Obviously, as you try to learn more about the customer, the tensions also come through as to at which point it becomes prying, at which point it becomes snooping. These things also have to be dealt with because many of us are used to the concept of if you're not the customer, you must be the product, and try to figure that out. But the truth is when you start looking for patterns, the things that we have left to solve in this century, the things that, one of the saddest things I was ever told was that I might live in generation peak longevity because what's happening in the world around us is beginning to threaten our existence in some way. So whether it's water, whether it's climate change, whether it's nutrition, whether it's healthcare, whether it's sort of communicable diseases, it doesn't matter. What matters is we're finding it hard to solve. And the solution lies in being able to collect data at scale, know the provenance of that data reasonably, have the tools to be able to manage that provenance, be able to exchange that data across culture and time zone, aggregate that data across culture and time zone, and come to objective, rational decisions rather than politics and emotion. And the good thing we got going for us is we have the ability to do that because the enfranchisement that is taking place by everyone being connected, okay, is something amazing. You know, how many I'm a grandparent, but I know that my mother's ability to talk to her grandchildren and now vicariously enjoy the growth of her great-grandchildren has changed dramatically. When I started work in England, it used to cost me greater than 1% of my monthly take-home in order to make a 3-minute phone call back. Right? Today, it costs me nothing. Right? These things matter. When I talked about my cat being connected, the biggest shift I could see why a 1-year-old can use an iPad is that we've thrown away QWERTY. Okay? That's a huge barrier that has been removed because you now don't have to have an artificial construct like QWERTY to be able to deal. We've spoken about security, the need for open models. Again, I'm going to skip over because I want to be able to spend a couple of minutes talking with MR at the end. That was what mother's home cooking normally looked like without the knife and the fork, and for that matter, without the cutlery, the crockery. Okay, I grew up in Calcutta in a home where if that was what was left on the table, you knew a foreigner had come for the meal. But what mattered to me was that the plate was clean. Mother's home cooking is about clean plates. Mother's home cooking is about very high trust levels. The problems we face today as a society, as the world, as individual countries, as companies, a lot of it require us to stand back and move away from just emotion onto data. The tools for that data start with the right trust levels. I've tried in a short space of time to articulate the various parts of that data landscape that need support from you guys for the tooling. I look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you for your time.